Bloodstained Ritual of the Night isn't great. It's only pretty good. I said it was pretty good. It's just not one of the great Metroidvanias. Ow! I still like it. I've beaten it 4 times. Stop hitting me. It's a good game for a budding franchise, and I can't wait to see where it goes next. After a decades-long nap, Miriam awakens to suboptimal circumstances. Turns out a lot happened while she was asleep. The good news? The Industrial Revolution had begun. The bad news? The Alchemist Guild she was unwillingly a part of doesn't like the Industrial Revolution. You see, the alchemists felt humanity's reliance on machinery would ultimately corrupt their spirituality, tainting their relationship with God and... I'm just kidding. The alchemists were pissed because they were losing money now that rich dudes were more interested in machines. To win back all that sweet moolah, they had to devise a plan to show investors that the guild was still important. And what did they come up with? Why, child sacrifice and demon summoning, of course. But who could have possibly foreseen that this would immediately go awry? Unable to control the demons, monsters ravaged the land and all but destroyed the guild. Worse yet, Miriam's childhood friend, the sole surviving sacrificial child named Jeeble, has suddenly reappeared, all grown and bringing with him a hellish castle filled with legions of demons. Having taken an oath to save her friend, Miriam shakes away the cobwebs of slumber and sets off to restore Jeeble's waning humanity and squash the demon invasion. Bloodstained Ritual of the Night has an interesting history, but I'm not getting into it. In this series, I do my best not to let outside influences affect my view. I look at every game on this channel strictly through a Metroidvania expert's lens and focus on whether the game's a great Metroidvania or not and why. However, it's tough not to mention that Koji Igarashi was the lead designer of this game. I won't insult you by reading his Wikipedia article because my viewers are well versed in the book of Igavania. And although I contend that Dragon's Trap is the first ever Metroidvania, excluding the original Metroid because it lacked the RPG elements associated with the Vania part, I can confidently say Iga's Symphony of the Night not only added more RPG elements, but also popularized the genre. So it was great to see the legend himself break away and prove Metroidvanias are still alive and kicking. But without the Castlevania branding, can Iga still make a great Metroidvania? Let's find out. Anyone familiar with Igavanias will feel right at home with Bloodstained's combat. Miriam moves like Alucard, or any other Igavania protagonist for that matter, so you know controls are tight and responsive, both on the ground and in the air. What makes the combat shine is how its simplicity can lead to some pretty fun techniques to maximize damage. Bloodstained's combat has a low skill entry and high skill ceiling, meaning it's accessible and easy to learn, yet rewards players looking for something a bit more complex in the form of animation canceling. The tried and true attack backdash attack and jump attack land attack have returned to allow veterans to melt any demon in their path. I always appreciate simple controls that allow for higher level play, and Bloodstained nails this. As Miriam, you'll have a lot of tools to help with demon disposal. Like any good Igavania, the less we say about Harmony of Dissonance the better, there are lots of different weapons to equip, each with their own pros and cons. Great swords hit hard but swing slow, whips have range but are less powerful, short swords strike a good balance on all parameters, and guns blow. They just blow, don't use them. Miriam can also equip armor and accessories to boost her stats, the latter of which also being cosmetic. Nothing says Miriam's ready to take on a world-ending event quite like having her wear a set of bunny ears in the cutscenes. The one thing I can always rely on about Igavanias is how they never take themselves seriously, which is kind of refreshing in this post-Dark Souls era. Seriously, there are so many accessories and weapons in this game that are just memes. Like the toy shoes that squeak with every step, and the glasses that zoom the in-game camera too close to be helpful. But my favorite is the mask that makes Miriam sound like a chipmunk.
You presume wrongly.
Stupid stuff like that is Iga's calling card, and I'm here for it. But weapons and armor aren't Miriam's only instruments of destruction and ridiculousness. For you see, Miriam's a shard binder, a kind of sorceress who absorbs demon essence to acquire their power. If you've played Iga's other works like Aria and Dawn of Sorrow or Order of Ecclesia, you'll know exactly how this mechanic works. Killing an enemy has a chance to drop a shard that Miriam can equip into 5 slots. 3 slots are mapped to different buttons and can be procced as long as you have MP. These skills are typically offensive in nature and can range from flinging fireballs, shooting arrows in any direction you want, or summoning a flying pig. Iga really doesn't care if you take him seriously. The 2 other slots are passive, one literally being for passive buffs like poison resistance or faster attacks, and the other for a familiar who follows you around. There is an immense amount of shards and skills to collect throughout your journey, so for gamers who like to collect crap and experiment, you're definitely going to find a lot of crap to experiment with. I personally found the directional shards to be a highlight. They tended to have the most damaging skills, and using the right analog stick to aim added a lot of strategy. Plus, it leveled the playing field against aerial enemies, which are always troublesome and obnoxious. It was great to not feel disadvantaged against them for once. There's actually a 6th shard type in this game called skill shards. These shards are unique in that they're always equipped unless you manually switch them off. The skill shards you acquire from defeating bosses upgrade Miriam's traversal abilities. She'll get the always welcome to double jump, but there are some more unique ones here too, like the ability to invert gravity to walk on the ceiling and the creatively named Deep Sinker, which bestows upon Miriam the ability to sink in the water. I'm not sure why Miriam can't just do that. Video games, I guess. Other traversal abilities can be found in the directional shards, like the stupid reflector ray that's tough to use and just as tough to look at, and the dimensional shift, a move that lets you teleport 2 feet in any given direction. Traversal methods attached to equipment slots is always a cumbersome choice because I hate having to equip and re-equip them. There's a shortcut option to save equipment loadouts, but that was cumbersome too. To round out combat, Miriam can find bookshelves that give her weapon skills. These skills require you to do button inputs like a fighting game, and each skill has a mastery level that increases as you use it. I have very little to say about weapon skills because I never used them. Each skill was specific to a kind of weapon or was exclusive to a specific weapon, and I just couldn't be bothered. Honestly, the whole system felt like an afterthought, though admittedly, maybe I should have focused on these skills. Maybe using them would have helped me kill the game's bosses faster because every second spent against them was agony. Of all the Igavanias, Bloodstained easily has the worst bosses. No doubt in my mind, this isn't up for debate. They all sucked. Every single one of them except Grimory, who was a straight up ripoff of Death from Castlevania, so she doesn't count as being wholly original, and Bale, who was legitimately awesome. What else did they have? A stained glass hand? A legendary Pokemon? A dinosaur that shot fire from its back? A Sentai villain from a corny Japanese kids show? You can't look me straight in the face and tell me those were awesome designs. And the 5 humanoid bosses? Super lame. The twin dragons were kinda cool, and the train monster was unique, I guess, but giant casino guy with the chips? Shut up about the giant casino guy with the chips. The majority of boss encounters in this game were soft. Even the optional bosses sucked. The Carpenter, the Slot Machine, the Simon Belmont clone, all dumb. Even OD, the Alucard ripoff. Dumb. It's a shame because past Igavanias always had the coolest boss designs. I guarantee you can name a dozen bosses just from Symphony alone, but I'd bet you can't remember half the bosses I mentioned from Bloodstained. And they're not fun to fight either. I found every boss to be way too tanky. I had this directional shard that did an insane amount of damage and stun-locked bosses. I'd fire it off until my MP depleted, so like 20 times, and the fight would still go on for a few more minutes with me constantly hitting them. It looked ridiculous and was grating, and the opportunities for cheese were more plentiful than I'm comfortable with. During my fight with Clone Miriam, she clipped through the wall, allowing me to beat her helpless head in. And there's a statue in the stained glass hand fight that blocks it from even hitting you. An easy fix to improve these boss encounters would be to cut their HP down and make it so they can't get stun-locked or cheesed, but not cheesing the boss would require the game to work properly. I'll preface my critique on Bloodstained performance by saying I played the game on the Switch, and I absolutely do not recommend playing it there. The Switch version of Bloodstained plays dreadfully. Constant hiccups and frame rate dips are the norm, and almost everything takes a moment to render once an area loads. Every time I walked into a new screen, assets would appear blurry for a second before the added layer of detail loaded on top of it. It was painful to watch. And is it just me, or is this game ugly in general? Not just on the Switch either. It's like the environments are too busy and there's not enough contrast. I'm not really smart enough to articulate or explain how to fix this. All I know is that this is a visually unappealing game. This could be subjective, as I'm not the biggest fan of 2.5D games. They don't always look the best, and they almost always age terribly. Based on footage I've observed, Bloodstained looks and plays much better on other consoles, but releasing this game on the Switch in such a state is a travesty. I couldn't even play the classic mode on Switch because it wouldn't even load. Stepping away from the performance and graphics, let's dive into the more technical aspects of the Metroidvania genre. Progression. Miriam levels up through EXP earned from killing enemies, but she can also permanently increase her stats by eating food, a la River City Ransom. Food can be found, or more often, cooked in the game's hub town. The hub town houses many of the game's shops and quest-giving NPCs, and you're going to want to do the quests if you're interested in crafting, as crafting materials is a majority of their rewards. Johannes, a friendly alchemist, can take these materials and convert them into equipment, as well as cook dishes and upgrade your shards. Shards can get stronger in two ways, increasing their grade by collecting multiples, and increasing their rank through Johannes and crafting materials. The most interesting part about upgrading shards is how passive shards become permanent skill shards once you level up both their rank and grade to 9. Sounds awesome, but the amount of grinding to get any shard completely leveled is insane and not really worth it. The drop rate on some of these shards is pretty low, even with a high luck stat, which I always boost as fast as I can and as high as I can in Igavanias. But not only do you have to farm for multiples, you also have to farm for materials, and you can bet your booty the drop rates on some of these materials are lower than Davy Jones's nutsack. The amount of farming and grinding in this game can be a real deterrent if you're not into that sort of thing, which I'm not. Thankfully, grinding's not integral to completing the game, or else I'd have stopped playing a long time ago. How it stands, it's great optional content for the obsessed. What kept me going with Bloodstained was its exploration, or more accurately, its rewards for exploration. Igavanias are renowned for all the random crap there is to find. Whether said crap is hidden behind some obscure wall or dropped by some random enemy, discovering things in Igavanias always scratches that Metroidvania itch, even if the majority of the crap you find is garbage. Midway through the game, I crafted a stupidly powerful sword that carried me to the end, rendering all weapon finds from that point on useless. This is an issue most of Iga's games have. Rarely do I find something that's better than the current thing I have equipped, and it's always a bummer. But that never stopped me from enjoying the hunt, and especially the random drops. The randomness in Igavanias are a double-edged sword. Of course, random enemy drops can be a pain while farming, but when playing casually, these drops can drastically change how you approach each playthrough. I've completed Bloodstained 4 times now, and each time I find cool equipment or a sweet shard I never had on my previous playthrough that makes this playthrough unique. This is a definite strength to the Igavania formula. The biomes in Bloodstained are pretty basic and borderline dull. Not only are they all kinda ugly, as I've already complained about, but they're not very imaginative. You have the castle area, the other castle area, the ice area, the fire area, the desert area, the underwater area. What is this, a Mario game? They even have a biome full of giant regular enemies, just like the world in Super Mario Bros. 3. It's all very uninspired. I mean, for real, there are 3 labs. And a train? Well, at least they were trying with that one. The one positive thing I'll say about the biomes is that I didn't have an issue while backtracking them. They were designed with convenient shortcuts that made navigation quick, and fast travel rooms were all over the place and near points of interest. I don't have a lot to say about the game's atmosphere that I haven't already said. I don't like the 2.5D approach, and I thought most of the game was actually pretty ugly. The enemy designs looked great and were more cohesive this time around when compared to other Igavanias, and they all had interesting death animations, another Iga staple. I thought the music fit well, but nothing really struck me as memorable. And as stated earlier, classic Igavania weirdness permeates throughout to undercut its gothic tone. I personally love this weirdness and feel it adds to the game's charm. I liked the voice acting, especially with Miriam and Zangetsu, the latter played by the legendary David Hayter. I enjoyed Miriam as a character in general. She exuded confidence, yet wasn't afraid to be awkward and silly. Concerning the narrative, I thought it had a decent plot. The setting was interesting, though the world building was kind of clunky. Most world building was done either through notes found throughout the castle or through repeated conversations with Johannes. It worked, but it just wasn't the most intriguing or fascinating way to reveal information. The main plot wasn't handled much better. Advancement was done mainly with character interactions in hallways or in pre- and post-fight scenes. Again, it worked, but it just wasn't the greatest. The twist was set up properly and revealed in such a way that it shed light on certain characters' competencies, and I liked that. Nothing was hard to follow, and everything was presented clearly, unlike most contemporary Metroidvanias. The true ending was good and positively added to the narrative's resolution, and the path to obtaining it was really cool and unique, even if there were some bumps along the way. To which I'm referring to gaining Zangetsu's sword. It didn't really feel great, like it wasn't logical, or to put it differently, it felt too video gamey. Why was Zangetsu just waiting for Miriam at the Oriental Sorcery Lab? Could he only test her metal there? Obviously not, as he's fought her elsewhere. It just didn't make sense and is never explained. It was manufactured by the devs to create a super secret biome where you could get a super secret reward. Of course I eat this stuff up, but it just feels better when creative logic is used to interweave extracurricular exploration with the narrative. But that's not the game's only bump in the road. Bloodstained actually does a lot of Metroidvania faux pas that I'd imagine a legend like Igarashi would have avoided. I call these faux pas Metroidvania bottlenecks. A Metroidvania bottleneck is when there's only one solution for progression, and the solution is so obscure you have to look up the answer. Bloodstained has 3, which is flabbergasting coming from a vet like Igarashi, as having just one bottleneck is enough to make your game look amateurish. Allow me to present them to you in chronological order. Bottleneck number 1, the train pass. This bottleneck's the most egregious. Upon trying to enter the train, you get stopped and asked for photo identification. Eventually, you find silver bromide, and astute gamers will recall that Dominique in the hub town needs it in order to get her camera to work. And like that, you feel like a genius. Take the silver bromide to Dominique, get your picture taken, and then boom, onto the train. Except, that doesn't work. You have to take your photograph to OD the librarian so he can make you a proper ID. This is never explained or hinted to and is super obscure because at no point does OD say he has the capability to create an ID for you. Nor does the game explain that the photograph isn't enough. You just can't pass when you try to use the photograph. And when I first played this game 3 years ago, there were a lot of bugs that caused a lot of things to not work when they were supposed to. Strike 1. Bottleneck number 2, going underwater. This one sucks because it's based on luck. Eventually, you'll get stuck and find the most logical path forward is through the forbidden underground waterway. The problem? You never learn to swim. The solution is to kill a specific enemy only found in a few rooms and hoping they drop the shard that lets you propel yourself underwater. It's pretty dumb, but I applaud the devs for thinking outside the box. Most important traversal skills are obtained after important story beats, not by chance. Interesting attempt, but it just didn't work. Strike 2. Bottleneck number 3, the flipping Aegis plate. This one's not so bad, but it's still a pain. The Aegis plate can be found in a random area only accessible when you flip the world upside down with invert. I had no idea the armor existed, and I had no idea it was where it was. It's so out of place and just awkward. This bottleneck I can kinda forgive because you technically could find it if you really studied your map and found the singular square you haven't visited yet, but it's just so randomly placed, it's almost absurd. For contrast, let's talk about Symphony's Spikebreaker armor. That basically had its own quest line and is found in an area you're teased with, instilling within players a desire for discovery and thus making the dark corridor memorable. Bloodstained's Aegis plate is in an out-of-reach spot in an area you visited hours ago and really have no reason to revisit organically. When compared to how players obtain Symphony's armor, it's apparent Bloodstained's lack of guidance and inability to draw the player toward the item in an intriguing way is a huge misstep. Strike 3. 3 strikes, you're out! Bloodstained is officially terrible. Don't waste your time with this trash. Good night, folks! I'm just kidding. Do you really think I beat a game 4 times that I didn't like? I even beat the game with Zangetsu and Aurora, which is super weird they put Aurora from Child of Light in the game. I'm not the only one who thought that was weird, right? Is Bloodstained Ritual of the Night a perfect game? Holy crap, no. This thing runs like dog shit on the Switch. Is it the best Metroidvania? Nah, I'd give that title to either Symphony of the Night or Aria of Sorrow. But we can all at least agree that the worst is Harmony of Dissonance. That goes without saying. So, where does Bloodstained fall in Iga's portfolio and in the pantheon of Metroidvanias? I'd say it's middling for Iga, and probably high mid-tier or low high tier in the genre as a whole. When all's said and done, I think it's safe to say Bloodstained's a pretty good Metroidvania, but it's just not great. It has all the hallmarks we've come to love with Igavanias, like solid combat, a ludicrous amount of things to collect and equip, and a pervading silliness that brings levity to a gloomy setting. But it unfortunately does a lot of things that I don't love, like its bottlenecks, its poor performance on the Switch, and its painfully lame and forgettable boss encounters. Ultimately, I like the game, and I'd recommend it to Metroidvania vets and newcomers alike. I actually think Bloodstained might be a good starter Metroidvania, as long as you don't play it on the Switch. Igarashi is a legend in the industry for a reason, and Bloodstained is another reason that reinforces his legendary status. If you haven't yet, give Bloodstained Ritual of the Night a shot. Just make sure you have internet accessibility for when you come up against those damn bottlenecks.